They say love finds you when you least expect it, but I never imagined it would arrive in silence. My name is Mina. I was 34 when I married Tariq, a successful businessman, charming in his own distant way. He was a widower, and though I had my reservations about stepping into another woman's home, I convinced myself that love could make anything work. What I didn't anticipate was the silence. Not the comforting kind, but the kind that echoes through walls, reminding you of all the things never said. Tariq had a son, Ayan, 19, barely a man, yet already more guarded than most men twice his age. From the day I moved into their grand but lifeless house, he was courteous, distant, and unreadable. He'd nod politely when we crossed paths but rarely offered more than a whisper of a greeting. I would ask how his day had been. He'd respond with a shrug or a clipped, "Fine," then retreat to his room like a ghost passing through. The house itself was beautiful, marble floors, long hallways, and rooms bathed in natural light. But it felt more like a hotel than a home. No laughter. No music. Just routine, repetition, and restraint. Tariq traveled often for work, sometimes leaving for days at a time. I thought that maybe, with him gone, Ayan and I could connect. So, I tried. I made his favorite dishes. Left handwritten notes on the fridge. Waited for him to join me in the living room. But nothing broke through his invisible wall. Still, I began noticing things, small, almost imperceptible gestures. If I left the kettle on, he'd switch it off. If a window was open too wide, I'd return to find it adjusted. One day, when I came down with a fever, I found a steaming bowl of soup at my bedside. No note. No acknowledgement. Just care, left in silence. There was something in those quiet acts that spoke louder than any conversation. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something I hadn't felt in a long time, presence. One afternoon, I sat alone in the backyard, watching the sun sink behind the trees. I heard the creak of the screen door behind me. I didn't turn around, but I knew it was him. He didn't say a word, just sat beside me, 2 feet apart, not touching, not speaking. And yet, I felt something shift. In that moment, I realized something unexpected. Sometimes, the loudest connections are forged without a single word. But I didn't know then how much that silence would come to mean, or how dangerous it would become. Over the weeks that followed, I stopped trying so hard. I no longer forced conversations or waited for responses that never came. Instead, I let the quiet settle between us like a warm blanket. Strangely, that's when Ayan began to change. His silences weren't as heavy anymore. He started staying longer at the dinner table. He'd answer when I spoke, still softly, still cautiously, but there was a shift. One evening, I caught him watching me as I arranged flowers in a vase. When our eyes met, he didn't look away, just nodded and said, "They look good there." It was barely a sentence, but coming from him, it felt like a paragraph. I began noticing the way he moved around me, deliberate, aware. If I was carrying groceries, he'd take the heavier bags. If I looked tired, he'd quietly pour me tea. Never a word of affection, never a touch. But his actions lingered longer than any embrace. Then came that rainy afternoon, the day the air shifted between us. I was rushing to close the windows as the storm rolled in. The tiles were slick, and I slipped. Before I could hit the floor, Ayan caught me. His hands gripped my arms, firm but gentle. We froze. For a second, maybe 2, we stood there, breathless, his eyes locked on mine. It should have been nothing. A simple fall. A lucky catch. But it wasn't. Something passed between us in that breathless moment. Something unspoken, undeniable. Later that night, as I stirred dinner, I couldn't stop replaying it in my mind. The way he looked at me, not like a child looking at a parental figure, but like a man seeing a woman he couldn't unsee. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was lonely, that my mind was filling in the blanks where love should have been. Because the truth was, Tariq and I had begun to drift. He rarely called from his business trips. When he did, the conversations were mechanical. How's the house? Did the bills get paid? Is Ayan behaving? Not once did he ask how I felt. So when Ayan began to lean into our shared silences, I leaned in too. One evening, we watched a movie together. I sat on one end of the couch. He sat at the other. But halfway through, he moved closer, not touching, but near enough that I could feel his presence like heat on my skin. We didn't say a word. We didn't have to. As the credits rolled, I glanced at him. He was already looking at me, and in his eyes, I saw a truth that terrified me. Not because it was wrong, but because it felt so right. What scared me most wasn't his gaze. It was the part of me that didn't want to look away. It was a quiet Thursday evening when everything finally cracked open. The electricity had gone out after a sudden downpour, casting the house in a soft candlelit haze. Tariq was away on yet another business trip, this time to Lahore. I had grown used to his absence, but that night, the emptiness felt different, sharper somehow. Ayan found me in the kitchen, trying to light a stubborn candle. He took it from my hands, his fingers brushing against mine. Barely, but enough to make me still. He lit the candle without a word, then placed it gently on the counter between us. "Would you like to eat together?" I asked, unsure why my voice trembled. He nodded. We sat on opposite sides of the dining table, bathed in flickering shadows. The silence wasn't awkward. It was something else. Something heavier, yet oddly comforting. As we ate, Ayan spoke, really spoke for the first time. "I used to hate this house," he said, eyes focused on his plate. "After my mom passed, every room felt like it was waiting for her to come back." I listened, heart tightening. "But when you moved in," he continued, glancing up at me, "it felt less like a museum, more like someone was alive here again." I didn't know how to respond, so I just looked at him. And for the first time, I didn't see a boy hiding in silence. I saw a young man who had buried too much, too soon. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I never wanted to take her place." "You didn't," he said softly. "You made your own." That sentence hung between us, gentle, but devastating. And then, something happened I never expected. He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. It wasn't forceful. It wasn't impulsive. It was calm, intentional, like he had been holding that gesture in his heart for far too long. I didn't pull away. I should have. But I didn't. For a long moment, we just sat there, hand in hand, the candlelight dancing on our skin like it was blessing the moment. But as quickly as it happened, Ayan stood up. His face was pale, his jaw tight with regret. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I shouldn't have." I shook my head, but he was already gone, disappearing into the hallway, into his room, into the same silence he'd once escaped. I sat there alone, the warmth of his hand still lingering on mine. And in that stillness, a truth whispered through me like a warning. This wasn't just a line crossed. It was a door opened, and I didn't know if I had the strength or the will to close it again. The days that followed were a return to silence, but not the kind we had once shared. This silence was colder, heavier, lined with guilt and distance. Ayan avoided me completely. No casual glances. No small gestures. Just footsteps behind a closed door and a presence that no longer lingered. I told myself it was for the best. That nothing had happened, at least not really. No confessions. No betrayal in the physical sense. Just a moment that changed everything. Tariq returned that weekend. He didn't notice the shift in the air, or perhaps he chose not to. He was busy with meetings, phone calls, and half-hearted attempts at small talk over dinner. The man I had married was becoming more like a house guest than a husband. But I didn't blame him. Not entirely. I was slipping away too, and we both knew it. One evening, Ayan left a note on the fridge. Short, polite, distant. "I've been accepted to a university in Islamabad. I'll be moving out next week. Thank you for everything." I stood in front of that note for what felt like an hour, rereading every word as if it might say something more the next time. He didn't say goodbye in person. He left early one morning. No knock on my door. No final glance. Just the sound of his suitcase, wheels rolling across the marble floor. The house felt colder after that. Tariq never asked why I seemed quieter. Maybe he assumed I missed Ayan. And I did. But not in the way a stepmother misses a stepson. I missed the version of myself I had briefly glimpsed, seen through his eyes. A woman worth noticing. A soul worth sitting beside in silence. I often wondered what would have happened if I had pulled my hand away that night. If I had walked out of the room instead of letting the moment stretch into something more. Maybe we both would have remained safe behind the walls we had carefully built. But we didn't. And yet, I can't call it love. Nor was it betrayal in the way the world might define it. It was something quieter. Something in between. Years passed. Ayan never reached out. I saw him once in a photograph, a social media post from a mutual acquaintance. He was smiling. Freer. Older. And just like that, I realized he had moved on. And I remained in the same house, with the same man, living a life that looked perfect from the outside, but echoed with everything we never dared say aloud. I never touched him. He never kissed me. But we both crossed a line the moment we stopped pretending we were strangers.